Hey everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today we are going to learn how to create a menu hover effect using HTML and CSS. So let's get started. Here we have a div element with the class attribute set to container. Next we have an another list which will be used to create the menu. Next we have a list item with the another list. It uses the style attribute to set an inline CSS variable color with a value of color code. Next we have an anchor tag that has an empty href attribute and a data text attribute which is set to home. Here the data text attribute is set to service. The data text attribute is set to text. This structure is repeated for each menu item like service, team, about, content, contact. Now let's add CSS. Here we have a universal selector. We set the margin and the padding to 0. Box sizing is set to border box and the font family is set to sans serif. Now let's style the container element. Here we set the position to relative. Mean height is set to 100 VH. Width is set to 100%. Display is set to flex. Justify content and align item is set to center. And the overflow is set to hidden. Now let's style the UL. Here we set the position to relative, so that it have a significant impact since no other position. Now let's style the list item. Here we set the line list style to none and the text align to center. Now let's style the anchor. Here we set the color. Text decoration is set to none. Font size is set to 2 rem. Padding is set to 5 pixel and 20 pixel. Display is set to inline flex. Font weight is set to 500. Letter spacing is set to 0.15 rem. Text transform is set to uppercase. And the transition is set to 0.5 second, so that it adds a smooth hover transition. Now let's set hover effect. Here we set the background color and the text color on hover. Here the color variable is used for the text color. Now let's set hover and not hover. Here we set the opacity to 0. Now let's set shadow element. Here the content is set to an empty string, so the shadow element does not actually generate variable. Position is set to absolute. Top and left is set to 50%. Transform is set to translate -50%. So that it center the shadow element both horizontally and vertically. Display is set to flex. Justify content and align item is set to center. Font family is set to cursive. Font size is set to 12.5 rem. And the font weight is set to 400. Here the text transform is set to initial, so that it won't be automatically capitalized. Letter spacing is set to 500 pixel. Opacity is set to 0, so that it hides with 0 opacity. And the color is set to a dark grey color. And the z-index property is set to -1, and the transition is set to 0.5 seconds, so that it adds a smooth transition effect. Now let's set shadow element. Here the content is set to the value of a data text attribute of the anchor tag. Opacity is set to 1. Background is set to variable color, which corresponding to the unique color assigned to each item. Width is set to 100 VW and height is set to 100 VH. Letter spacing is set to 0. So there you have it. Thank you for joining on this tutorial. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more web development tutorials.